Hello, and welcome back to our series on learning Google Apps Scripts for HR, brought to you by Prairie-HR-Solutions, where we believe knowledge should be shared and in empowering our fellow HR professionals and really rethinking how we're delivering our HR services and solutions by utilizing the tools that we probably already have at our disposal.
My name is Jake Finger.
Principal consultant here at Prairie-HR-Solutions. And in this video, I want to kind of take a step back from
Take a look at our
HR admin interface because where we left off was we created two different views,
complete from this
those two different
functionality, and
views
that
are
functionality
essentially
is
toggled
we are
by
able to
buttons here. And if you have no
create
idea
a
what I'm
record,
talking about,
retrieve
please
a
go back
record,
and
update a record,
watch
and
my
then
earlier
archive a
videos
record,
to where we created
and
this. But essentially, a user can go in and hit records,
we've also
which will
created
toggle
our instructions.
this
when you
div
first pull it up.
section from none to
And
block.
the one thing that I
And
would
then
like
they can
to
do
do
the same thing with
right off the
analytics,
bat
and analytics
is
has a
change
placeholder
this
of hello.
information banner
Before we
up here,
start
'cause
building this out,
what
anytime
I
that
would
you
like to
give
do
yourself
is
your
take a
user
second
instructions or an
go
alert,
over
you want to
how we
draw their
perform
eyes for
calculations
everything else that's
within
going on the screen.
Google Apps.
You want to draw their eyes
Now,
up
granted,
to where you're
yes,
wanting them to
we are in a
be.
spreadsheet.
So
And
here,
what
I
we
would
can
like to
do
change this
is
from
we
this
can simply
graphite-ish color.
find,
Say we
maybe
want to find the sum, we can do
a bright
built-in
yellow
functions
with
here.
black lettering, because it's such a contrast that their eyes are naturally going to be able to go over and look at it.
Well, the reason
So
why
we're going to do that,
it's
and
not
then
working is because
now that we
have
have
a
a
way
way
to interact
so
with
let's
our
do number. There we go.
records. So we could do
What
it.
I would like to do
we
is
can
create
do
a
the
different
sum.
view.
I mean, we can even
really
do
we want to
average.
get into the HR piece,
Particularly the analytics.
spell it right,
And
the average of it,
This
and
UI
we can do
sidebar
our here.
calculations this way.
There's no way within Google, it's been
But
depreciated,
instead
so
of
that means they
taking
kind of
up
took it away.
space
There's
here
no
on our
way
H-
to take
on our
this
sidebar
and make
Google
it
Sheet
larger.
or creating another
It
tab with
is
these
the
calculations.
size that it is.
The idea is
What
to
we
make
could do
this
is we
sheet
could
a little
add
bit
in more fields,
easier
like
to
say,
manage
of
and
course, you're
interact
going to want
with,
other things,
which is the
in
reason
here,
why we
such
created
as,
this interface.
maybe some demographics,
So we could
some
actually
EEO
do the
information,
calculations within our code,
as well as maybe
and
some
then
benefits
have it populate
information.
over here on
Date of
our
last,
interface, which is what we're wanting to do.
salary increase.
Now we have to stop
performance
and think
management
about
criteria,
where is it that we want these
things of that
calculations
nature,
to
and
occur.
as we're creating more
So
and more
anytime
fields, it's going to push it
you
lower
have a
and lower
client
and lower,
or a
and the user, in order to create
server-side
that record, is going to have
function.
to
So our
scroll, which
HTML is
is
server-side.
fine
This is how
to a
or
point.
client side, excuse me.
And this can become so
This is
cumbersome
how
to
our
where
client, in this case our
this
user,
size
is interacting
here
with
isn't
our
necessarily going to fit
on the
what it
server
is that's
side
needed.
or the Google
And for
Apps
that,
side,
instead of
all
using
that stuff
a UI
is outside
interface
of
that's
it.
built into our
You can actually go in
spreadsheet
here
here,
and
what we would do is take the
there's
spreadsheet,
a
use
function
it
on
as
the
a
browser,
database,
away
and
in
then
the browser
create
that
a
you can
web
actually
app.
look at,
And there will be a future
the
video
code
on a web app, because
and
in
the
order
way
to
you
make
can,
this
when
a
you look at
fully
that code, if it is in
dynamic
HTML,
dashboard along with an
within
analytic
HTML,
tool, we're
then
going to need
that
a little bit more
client
space.
can see it.
But I don't
And
want
when
to
we're dealing
create
with
a
HR
massive HRIS
we don't want
system
anybody to see that. That's
right
not
off the
supposed to be
bat,
looking
because
at it.
we're going to use it.
So we
It
don't
can't
want
be
nothing to
generalized
happen
enough
on
to be
there.
used across all
And that's kind of the
industries
way that we
without
built our
significant
records. So when we
tweaking.
retrieve a
So
record,
ideally,
when we go in here,
you would
and
take
we
what we
retrieve a
have
record,
here as a
say
sample,
35,
and then do a use case on what it is
process
that your
that. What ends
industry
up
and company
happening
needs,
is
and then you would
it
build and
sends
modify
the
what we have
request,
here,
so to speak,
written
over
in
to
code, the
Google
samples
Apps Script,
here,
which is the
and then
server
expand it
side
out to
outside
actually
of
meet
you.
that need.
And then that
But there's
server
one
side,
piece
the Google
that
Apps
I
Script
would
side,
like
gathers
to
all the
provide y'all
data,
before we end this series,
and then it
that
returns
is
the appropriate data.
changing
In this case, it
views.
returned
So
this
what
line
we would
right
like
here.
to do
But
is
it didn't
some sort of
return
analysis.
each individual
And if
value.
we were
It
to
didn't
put an
return
analysis
finger,
here,
first
it would
div,
clutter
job,
up the
that,
record. It would just be
56,000.
difficult to discern
What
for
it did was
users.
it returned
Okay,
it
this
in
is a record,
clump.
and then I got to scroll all the way down,
And
that
that clump
is a way
we
that I
gave
can
a
do
name
analytics.
of, I believe, employee
What we
data,
can
like
do
data.
is change the view.
So when somebody goes in,
and what I mean by
reads
changing the
the
view is
code
something that
or
we've
the
already
JavaScript
done on
So when we hit
our
process, we
client
have this
side, all they're going to see
information bar
is
that
is set to
amp
block,
data.
and then after 5 seconds,
it's not going to have any
it
of this.
automatically sets itself to none.
And
it disappears, and it doesn't take
Then our
up
code
space.
goes through and
We
pulls out each
could
index to populate it in here.
do the same exact
So when we're
thing
dealing with our calculations,
we also want that to
our
occur
record
in
information
our
here,
Google Apps Script side,
and then create
send it
another
over,
div,
and then we
that is
populated
specifically for
appropriately.
analytics, and then it shows
So
this
before we
entire
start building
section.
this out, I would like
Once
to
you press
go
a button
into
like
our
records
Google App Script and kind of go over
and hides
how
it when you
that
push a
we
button, such as
can
analytics,
perform
and then
calculations
sets the
within
analytics
Google
div
App Script
to
or JavaScript.
block.
So that's a way
Since
that
we have a
can
different
create
view,
different views.
What I would
Again,
like
in
to
the future
do
we're
is
going
create
to create
another
GS file
series.
The great thing about Google
Apps
Apps Script
web
is
app to where this
is
entire
considered, this whole thing
piece
is
the
considered
UI
one
won't be in the
project.
spreadsheet. It'll be on
And
its
that
own
project
separate
is called
web
Learning
page
Google Apps Script
built
for
with
HR.
Google Apps Script
Now,
that's
any
attached to
file
our
underneath
spreadsheet.
this,
That way we have a lot
project
more room to play with.
can be
we
called.
can create different
So
pages.
it's all shared. So we're not
and
having
really make it
to
a lot more robust.
create a separate call
But
function.
for now,
to
this is a good
grab
introduction,
file
and
from
it does serve
somewhere.
our
It's
purpose.
automatically
So let's
here
go
and
ahead
is
and
available.
initially, and that also
Change
includes our global variables.
this line up here, and we can do that.
So since we have a different view, I would like
we'll
to
go over here
create
to our
files
HTML
specifically for analytics.
So how we do
And
that is
what we're looking for is
it's going to be a script file,
our notification.
and we just want to call this
div
analytics. And our notification div, we don't want to set
So
the
in this
whole div
analytics
to yellow. That would be
give
obnoxious.
us something a little
What we want is just
better
that
name,
span where it says
let's call
information.
our
So in order to
practice function
select the span, we could do it by class, input group
Analysis.
text. But what that input group text is going to do is it's going to select.
And what we
every
want to do
element
is
with
we
that
want to
class.
go over,
And we don't want that. We
grab
want to specifically
our
identify
sheet
this.
data.
Now we could
Isolate
isolate
it
it
by
by
the
the first
variable.
occurrence
Let's call that
of
variable,
input group div. But that really hinders our ability to
analytic
create
data.
something above it, which we're
And
actually
that is
going to
be
do.
equal to sheet.
So let's instead
Now remember, we're
give
able
this
to
an
call
ID.
this because it's a global
And
function.
this ID,
and
since it's the
is
same
going to be,
project,
let's just call
we
it
can
notification
in between our files.
span. That's a great thing.
And then
about
what we're
Google
going to do
Apps
is
Script,
go
where
up to
we're,
our style,
running in Python
our
or whatnot.
CSS
We would
here.
have to call and
and
link
since we're not
various
selecting the class,
files
remember
depending
the class
on
takes the period,
how we have it
we're
set up.
selecting the ID.
So sheet,
To select an ID,
and what we
use
want
a
to do in that
hashtag,
sheet is get a range,
and then the ID name.
and we want to start
notification span. And what we're wanting to do is set the background of this. The background
we don't want to start
color,
at row one,
column
let's
one.
try yellow.
The header.
We want to start at row 2.
And let's make this
column
important.
1.
And the reason we're
And then
making
we want
this
to go down
important
and get the last
is because
row,
we've
because
set
remember, as
the
this grows,
input group
the
text
last
to
row is going to
this
change.
graphite-ish color.
But since
And
we are not
set that as important to
including
override
the header,
what Bootstrap
we're
already
gonna have to
had.
subtract one.
And
And
now
I'll
we're
show
going
you
to
the
override
that
that. And
important.
then for the length of the
With this
column,
yellow.
we also
So let's go
just want to leave it
save
open and
this,
just
and
get
then
the
let's
last
check and see
column.
how that yellow turns out.
Hopefully it's a
So we
nice
want to start at row
yellow
2,
and not
column 1, and then
a
how many
hideous
number
yellow.
of rows we want to get will be
Okay, that works. So now you'll see that we also have to change the
get
color. So we'll
the
go back
last
here, and now let's change the color.
and then
to not white, we'll change it to
the number
black.
of columns we want to do
And
sheet
we'll use hex.
last
The
column.
good thing about, and then we want to get the values.
black
So I'm not
color
going to add -1.
It
because
is
I want to
all
show what happens when you don't
do the -1.
zeros. And I mean, we can do 3 zeros. That'll be fine. So let's log this out.
I believe, just like we did
And
the whites
this,
up here.
if you remember right, should pull up
All right, so now let's go back here and try this again.
our two-dimensional array
with all of our
process.
data.
There we go.
That works.
And there will be an
Now, as you
easy
can
one.
see, you're forced, your eyes
at the
automatically
very-
are forced to look at that
So
bright color.
let's
And you
run
can
this.
change that color to whatever you
And
like.
as you
but
can see,
for now,
it's
let's just leave it yellow.
starting at row 2.
And
But remember, we
so
have
now
this
what we're
header
wanting to do
that we're not
is we are
including.
wanting to
But when we go down and
put
get
some
the
select
last
buttons up here,
row, and
it
the
is
select
including the
buttons
header because it
will
has data,
control
and then it's
toggling
counting all the way down. And
our
that is the reason why we
divs
have
to where
this
they're
empty
either set to block or
element
none,
just
here.
like we have our notification.
So we get rid of that empty
So
element
let's
by
go
adding
to our
-1.
bootstrap.
And remember, this is a two-dimensional array.
Let's go to
So
our
let's add this
bootstrap
-1
here.
first.
Rerun it.
And let's find our buttons.
And then you'll notice that that takes care in a simple way that empty.
Okay, so we have our
element.
buttons. And since
Now,
we're dealing
in
with
order to
limited
get
space, I don't want to create
data in a two-dimensional array.
a nav bar.
This first level here, this level,
But
would be index
our buttons are
0,
here, and these are individual
and then
buttons.
inside this index
Let's look at
0
our button
element
groups. So our button
to get
groups
this
See, that looks like it'll work right there.
It would be
our
1,
button groups
2,
are
3,
basically in a single
5,
line, and they're clumped
6,
together.
7. But remember,
so we could do
indexes start at 0, so this is 0. 1, 2, 3, 4.
We can do record. We can do
6,
analytics in the middle, and then
so
we
in
could
order
do,
to get this 98,
benefits or
what we
something
would have
over
to
here,
do
maybe
is
compensation, or whatever it is that we would need. So let's grab this. Let's snag
we would
this.
have to select.
And as you can see down here, it gives you a little
level.
Anytime that we
it's a
create
two-dimensional
something,
array, and then inside
anytime
that
that
level,
we would have
something
to
HTML-wise
select where we were at.
that is visible through a screen.
So then when we run this,
when we
what'll
develop
happen is
it, we
it'll
have
pull
to ensure
up
that we
98,000.
meet criteria
So I mean,
to
we can
allow
get it
all
that way.
users to
But
be
in
able
order
to
to
interact
get the
with that.
salary of
So we have
single element,
technology
we would also
such
have
as
to do
screen
that, and
readers,
then store all
and
that.
the screen readers
inside another
identify
array.
these.
Well, luckily, there's a simple way to
simply
do that.
by
We've already
certain
done
roles.
it.
So this role here
And where
group
we did
the
it
screen reader
was right here.
will identify
This
that as a
mapped
group,
function,
a group of buttons,
and this is
and
the other
then
way that
this label
we did it.
here
describes
one
what it
spells
is.
out
Function. This is the shorthand with an arrow
So we
function.
will need to change.
We'll use
we'll
this
leave the
method,
group,
but what map
we'll need
function
to change
does
this array label
is it goes
this
through
is
this
important
array.
for accommodations.
This two-dimensional array.
If you're using it
And
specifically
it
for yourself
returns
and nobody else
a
is
one-dimensional array.
this
at
isn't necessarily
every
as important, but the second
element, in
somebody
this
else
case, every two
uses
index.
it or has the chance
So
of
let's go
using
ahead
it,
and
you really do need to pay attention
do
to
that with our
accessibility
data here.
We'll create
So
another
let's
variable.
copy
Let's call
this over,
salary,
and then what we'll do is,
and that salary is
we'll
going
go
to
back
be
over
equal
to our code,
and where we're
analytical
wanting
data,
analytic data.
So go to our
we
layout
want
here
to
real
map
quick.
that. And this
We
map
don't want
method
it under
takes
the
a function,
notification because the notification is
and
nice.
that function
We
is,
want to
let's
keep
just
the
call it S for
notifications, but what
salary.
we can do is
Or
place
no,
it
we'll call it
above
R for row.
this information div.
And
here.
remember, this can
may
be
be separated
anything,
by
you
a
just have
line.
to make sure it's consistently used.
So let's go in
And
here
what that
and look at
function
our
is going to do is it
line
is
here.
going
Let's
to
create-
return.
Let's create a line
The
to separate our notifications.
seventh
So that has a
element
line on top, line on bottom.
of the R.
And what I
And
mean
then
by
let's
that is
put
it's going to go through
our button
this two-dimensional array,
right
and
here.
it's going to say, okay,
Now,
on this area
essentially,
is, let's just put
map the 7th index
We can just put
and
navigation
create
buttons
a new array calling it
instead of the example.
salary.
We want to change this to
So now what we can do is we can go down
records,
here and
and
log
we'll change this
this
to analytics.
for now.
Now, when we save this, it is going to be
Run
left
it,
justified. It's
and
going
then
to be
what
all the way
happens
over on the
is-
left.
Is now we have
So we'll do is
a
we'll save
very
it, and I'll show you what I mean.
easy
So we're gonna have to
one-dimensional array
adjust this.
where we don't have to keep hitting square bracket, first level array,
Open our
square
sidebar here.
bracket, second level array.
And
can
as
just
you can
go
see,
in if
it's,
I wanted
it's all the way over
78,
here on the
it'd be
left.
0,
And when
1.
we hover it,
85
it goes to
03.
the
or we can
default
take
grade because that's how we have
array
it set up.
and simply
Which,
do the
you know, is
analysis
fine.
on all of them.
What we can do is actually make it an outline,
So
which
let's
we'll probably do. I like
work
that.
on how it
And
is that we can actually
We want to take this whole
perform
group over here
calculations
and shove it over to the middle.
within.
And we want to
Google
do
Abstract.
that not static because
So we know
if
some.
you increase the size,
Let's
it
do-
could
Let's create a couple variables
kind
here.
of mess
Call
with that
this 2.
spacing. So let's go over to
Now
our
you notice that I'm not
bootstrap
using parentheses
again,
or
and let's
quotation
go
marks.
down here
Excuse me.
to
So when
our
you don't use
display.
quotation marks,
Okay,
it
so we
is
have our
automatically designated as
What we're
a
actually
number
wanting
type.
is
now. If we were
Flex.
to put it in quotation marks, now it is
and
a
our
string.
flex. We don't want it.
So what we want is a number. So we'll say
That's a
X
flex
is 2.
container. Here we go.
And then we'll
Direction.
do
we want it right smack
Y
dab in the middle.
Is
We'll scroll down
1.
here to justify content. Here we go.
So now what we can do is
And
simply
justify center
create
content. So it's this right
function.
here, and you can see that it's simply a
or
class.
a variable. We'll
So
call
what we
it
can
sum.
do
and what
is copy
this is simply going to be is
deflex justify content
X
center that they already
plus
built into CSS
Y.
for us. Just
And
copy
then
that.
let's
We'll go back over here to
log
our
that
HTML
sum
code.
out. And this div,
What we'll do is
we
will
want to go at the end of the
forward
class.
slash this out.
Because remember, we
Delete
can
that.
always have additional
When we
classes
log
assigned
this
to it.
sum, or this
So
sum
now when we
variable
save
out,
this,
you'll see that it's 3.
and it is taken out to
And come back over
one
here,
decimal,
and
which is
then
fine. We can essentially
refresh our sidebar,
fix it, which we can get into a little bit later, but you'll see that it is now essentially stretched.
We can also,
all the way across. We'll get rid of this right
multiply
here real quick because we don't want that yet.
And if we ever need one, we can easily just copy and then this little star Y,
and we'll go over and save it.
And now,
and then what we did was we removed this
that
button here.
So now when we refresh it,
you'll see what happens with the Flex Justify content.
It's 2.
It is taking the content,
and we can also do division,
essentially centering it. But since we don't have we're not defining columns, it's just filling the entire width, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. Now let's take this and actually do the outline. So we'll run back over here to our Bootstrap real quick.
Oops.
So we'll run back over here, our Bootstrap, and
then we have division
buttons, and what we're looking for is this right here.
So
outline styles, it looks like it takes the same exact thing as this.
I know we all got into HR because we didn't have
to
do
math.
What we can do is go back to our code.
Math is
and grab our button to do it.
So if you remember back in school,
our button outline
we had in order of operations.
Button outline secondary. So we'll grab this.
Say we wanted
and then we'll put it up here, and that should
essentially
take care of our
find
buttons.
The average.
So we don't want button primary. We want
find the
button outline secondary. And the secondary and the primary
is we take,
just as a reminder, in Bootstrap they determine the color or
Y, and then we divide that
shade, I guess, of the button based on secondary
by however many
danger.
So in our case, we have,
and we took care of our button hover by changing it to that graphite gray. So now when we go back over here,
because remember, order of operations, this is what is done first.
Refresh it. It's not going to be blue.
Y, and then we want to
take just like our process button,
the sum of that,
and then as we highlight it,
and then divide it.
So that works for now. 2. And then as you can see, our information comes underneath it, so this will always be available. And we can give ourselves a little bit of space here. I'll do that when we go back. So what we're wanting to do right now, these buttons don't do nothing,
and when we run it
there, you can mash them all you want. Nothing's going to happen.
So
but we can fix that.
Now, when we
look at
having our records button,
our
essentially
data,
toggle,
this
salary
this
off and on. Now we want to keep our employee number because our employee number is how we're going to pull.
So if we were going to take
our
average here,
so we are wanting
and
to
then
pull information,
divide it by however many
elements there were.
Well, the number of elements,
and then what we're wanting to
if we archive a record,
information for our
that record
analytics
will go down by however
so we're going to need to pull that information,
and if we created it, it would increase
through our employee number. So we don't want to collapse that.
So we can't simply just go in here
permanently
every time and manually count.
So what we can do is
and then
last name
change our function
to record.
That kind of defeats the purpose of automation. But what we
and then we can take that entire div and
do the same thing that we did with our information and set it to block or none. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's wrap it in a div.
Go back over here. How many elements
HTML code
are
so we
in
our
salary
keep
array?
So
our
employee
number,
we can use a built-in, I don't want to call it a function, but a built-in tool called length.
But we would like to wrap
both
this
JavaScript and
Google Apps Script.
And let's give this div an ID.
And what length is called is it's called a property.
And
so what I mean by a property,
this
what I meant by a
property is
anytime we have a variable or something
that is an object or
record
data, and in our case, salary contains the data.
It consists of certain properties.
Come down here.
It consists
our button
of,
to close it out.
One, a length. How long is that array
here? And we'll close out the div, give ourselves a nice little reminder that
we simply go in here,
record
and type dot length,
section.
And as you can see, it's a property array object.
So now what we can do is
jump up
provide
a number.
And
so we have an array, and we're trying to find the length property.
Use this same language
to set that display of that div
can run this
to none.
And as you can see,
it's
populating 13. Well, let's check to see if that's actually accurate.
Come down here to our
log,
record section, div, and
we'll
simply set that style to none. So now when we save this,
what we do is when we run this, it'll produce the array.
Then you go back here,
and then it'll give us
the
list
tab.
0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
and
9,
then refresh.
12.
And you'll see that only the employee number is available. Everything else
13.
Is
not
viewable, and
so there's
not
13 elements
space
in our array.
So when
the length
user
is accurately putting it as 13.
So now what we can do is now that we know the length, we know how many elements are in there.
So I think we need to move that div down to our process button.
So if we were to take,
and then while we're there, we will also go ahead and give ourselves some space here, and then write the code
and let's
to toggle
say
this. So let's go back to our code here.
The length.
Let's go down here and see where we ended our div. And we ended our div right here, and where we're wanting to end
salary dot length is what we did was
here.
We just
that'll include that process button,
a variable that can dynamically
so let's go up here and give our button
depending on our array. And then instead of doing
margin,
and you know this margin B, this
length
MB
is the
so let's go ahead and do this
to
in
3,
practice, which is a good space. But we're not wanting the bottom, we're wanting the top.
So when we think about
what we're going to put in here,
when we think about doing an average
within, and we'll use
Google
Apps
Script,
we'll see how
that goes.
JavaScript.
That'll do is give us a little bit of space from that top
isn't
head.
A function. Well, there's a built-in function for.
Let's give our
button,
the sheet side,
a way to
average,
interact with it,
but we don't have it
function.
readily
so what we
built
can do
in.
Is
here.
Instead of
I'm going to change this
setting a listener,
we'll just call the function within our button here
of
number because we're going to use that variable. But there's
we'll put down here
way that we can simply just put in
click
average of these two numbers, because average we want this
in our code doesn't exist yet
because we have to
a function name, and that
function
name is
function.
Let's call it essentially what we're going to do is we are going to record toggle, write a piece of instructions within our function here that will iterate. So now anytime that this
array
button is clicked,
it's going to go over
and let's go ahead and create
what we're wanting
it to do
function down here
is sum each one.
Okay, so that's a notification toggle,
and
so
then
we'll just
take that
length
of it, top, and then divide the sum by that length, and then that'll produce the
function
average.
Record toggle. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take
there's multiple ways that we can do this, but when any time that we hear the term iterating
here, except for this timeout, we don't need this
an array of data.
But we'll copy all of this.
The first thing that should come to mind for you is loop. Now, I'm not going to get too heavily
so we don't
into
need this
loops,
set timeout piece,
for loop, while loop. I guess we have 4.
We don't need this.
I guess we can.
And
also
what we're going to change is we don't want to select
what
the
I really want to
notification
do
box.
Is
what we want to do is
select. I like doing what's
div.
called a for of loop.
We want to be able to select.
And the reason I like doing a for of loop is because
record
it
section
is
ID.
a lot easier.
First, let's create a variable that selects that record section.
And instead of burying it inside a function,
it takes
like
a
this,
specific syntax
here
outside of a function.
I'll explain.
So let's
do
syntax
of the code that I'm writing, just like with the map,
is going to equal.
And then once we get done, you will have
and that ID
set of instructions or a function specifically for
record
section. The average.
So now we can
go ahead and
use
get
this
started
record section in any function. So we want to replace this notification box.
This is a very high level review of how for of,
and once we get all of these functions
built, we can actually
create
this function,
a separate video,
this function,
and then the other function
loops. Everything loops.
Toggle our analytics
to go over
and put it in one function.
What I'll do is I'll use terminology
that
is typically used, so
with an if statement.
happen
depending
to,
on what button was
Google
pushed,
or go to another
and run
site or
that
whatever
block
and
code.
pull
That
up
way we can clean
examples,
up all these
I'll
functions,
use the
not have
variable
repeating
titles
functions.
that are typically
So now we have
used, I
that. So
suppose,
let's
to keep it somewhat
save
consistent
this,
and
then go
easier
back to
to
our
understand.
sheet
This is one of those
and see where we are at.
ideas and methods, the loops, that are kind of difficult to grasp at first, but once you start using them and you start seeing what they're actually doing, and you begin changing some variables, things will start to click, and you'll say to yourself, "Oh, okay, I see what's happening now." And more importantly, I see what I need to do to change things within it, and how I can utilize loops within our
that process button should be hidden,
whatever array it is that you're using. So let's go ahead and just jump in.
And it's not. So
what we're wanting to do is,
but ultimately, this records button, when we press it, it should essentially toggle.
And this function is going to exist within our other analysis,
the style display,
which is fine. As you can see, we had another function within our map.
Let's go back and see what we got going on here.
So in this function, what we are wanting to do is to calculate the average using the for of loop. And what we can simply do is call this function average. And the argument that this function is going to take is that array. And our array, our one-dimensional array, is salary.
And
so the argument is salary.
We have this notification block.
This function, we need to create a variable. And that variable needs to handle essentially all of our sums initially. So we need a variable to store all of our sums.
Div.
So let's just use sum. And what we want to initially set that is 0. And what's going to happen when we iterate
section,
through
get element by ID, record section,
our array up here,
toggle,
it's going to take this 0 and change it. So it's going to go to that first index.
That's that.
And then it's going to add, like in this one, it would
section style
take the 2, if this was our array, and then it would add 1 to it, which would be 3.
Okay.
It would change the 0 to 3 and then store it as the sum. And then whatever number's left, it would add on to that, change the number, and store the new value in sum. So that's how we store our sum.
Yep. There we go.
So let me make a comment here.
I will combination of that container element,
function
not including the
calculate average.
So we had a div
and then
now when we press
this
record,
sum is changing to store
still nothing.
Current sum of array values.
We are missing.
There we go. Now let's get into our actual
spelling or something
loop.
So let's scroll through here and read.
So what we want to do is we want to iterate over
missing
our array data, and then perform.
And often you'll find that often when something is not working,
it is something so simple
and obnoxiously overlooked that. Yep, it is
essentially each one.
So what I mistakenly did was,
when
instead
you're
of writing this in camel,
for loops or while loops,
I
or
put
in our
a
case,
capital R there, so this ID
loops
was not aligning.
It's best to remember the syntax. So initially, while you're learning it and becoming more and more familiar and confident with it, you simply go in and change the variables.
And then we go back.
So to create the loop
and refresh it,
we essentially start with the letter 4, as you can see.
Now when we click it, it populates.
And what we're going to do
now we can do the same exact thing to analytics.
Declare a variable.
So what we'll do is
declare that variable value.
The last piece of this video,
so we're saying let value
section
of,
and what we're wanting to
our
do
salary array
is essentially when we press analytics, this goes away and shows the analytics, and then when we press records,
since we're
analytics closes to none, and this shows up. So let's go ahead and create just an empty div here, and we'll just put
we want to
So we'll go back here and we can just simply start this down here after this button.
And since we're wanting to,
and we'll have to move this container
essentially accumulate a value
our
across
button here.
Each
we want to create another div,
each element,
and we will
what we're wanting to use
is an operator,
an ID
that looks a little different.
Analytic, but it is a plus equal to, and what that plus
and
equal
we'll just simply do a
does is it continues to
an
add
H4
across
with simple
each
hello. Seems like a
iteration.
Coding your first thing is hello
and
world.
What we're wanting to add is
out that
value. So it looks like this syntax right here,
section.
And we want to end this line.
And now what we'll do is we need to give
with that. And again, I'm not going to go too in depth because
our analytics
button for of and for each and
the same exact thing. We need to give it a set of episodes
on
regardless, which I'll create. But
so what we'll do is
we will copy this.
We'll just use this syntax,
and we will create.
And then what we want to do is essentially, now that we have
instead of
the
record
toggle,
we'll just call
all of these values in our array stored in this variable, and this variable has now been updated thanks
and
to
now
this
let's go create
for
that
of loop. We
function
want to
down here
calculate the
the
average.
same exact thing that we just did for the record.
Calculate the average. Now to calculate the average, we can simply
what we're going to do is we need to create that variable. Let
the sum
analytics
section, which has now been updated because we went through and looped through, we iterated through each single element
document,
and we added them together.
This is going to be,
we added those values together, stored it in the sum. We can use that sum, and then we just simply divide quotes by the salary.
And now let's create this function
length.
And that function is going to be the same.
What we can do is
exact thing as our record toggle, except it's not going to be calling our record section. It'll be calling our analytics section.
Oh, we're missing.
Let's go ahead and copy parentheses. The contents of this.
This parentheses does not belong here. This parentheses
and instead of record section, it's going to be analytics section.
So that's that.
We'll make that change. And again, we'll go through and get rid of all these redundant functions.
Should be closing out the function,
and then we need our original.
A little bit more.
So we're missing a parentheses. There we go.
So now let's make sure that we have everything in camel case and
everything's aligned up. Tab this over. We're not missing like an S or something
with that function.
Perfect. Okay, analytics toggle.
Okay, so now when
this,
in order to
get the result, when we run this,
we got to be able to see our result. What we can do is simply,
so when we go to save and refresh this
result
of that function.
The one thing that we have
to do that, we simply put log.
Now we want to log.
I just realizes we have not set this function. So
we want to log
section to have
none.
Ridge. So let's copy that and go down here and
that average is going to take our array.
I want to set that
because we want to
pass
empty the salary.
So now we'll say when we go back here, this may be
to that function.
It'll align.
So let's go ahead
it's not
and
part of that container.
Now, if we were to have a second or a different array that we called, I don't know.
So as you can see,
tenure,
nothing's here.
Then we
go to
analytics.
That in there when we wanted to log it, but
we want to pass our salary.
Okay.
And now what will happen is
let's go back here and figure out what it is that we did.
What it'll do is it will give
an
average of this array. And this array can change. It can either decrease a number, it can add numbers onto it, it can go up to a length of 1,000.
The problem when you start naming variables,
and
you don't want it to be so simple to where you don't
simply
know what it is. But you also don't want to make it so
let's run that
with so many
average of our salaries
actually.
So we have this
screw
array
up like we
of
have
salaries, and we just found the average of
now when we toggle that
is 95,461. And
but the one thing that we're going to have to fix
so let's go ahead and fix
Notice how, before we end this video, this element is all the way over.
To fix this, because nobody
this
ever
piece right here has this nice little gap.
Things
that's
because of that container,
that is,
and we have that container
closed.
In HR, we typically
before
only carry
this
it out to
div here. So all we have to do is just move that closing container
2 decimal places,
and
sometimes
that will
3,
incorporate
this
into
into
the
system. So let's go ahead and take care of that.
And then the other thing we need to do
and
is,
when we're dealing
if
with
somebody goes to
decimals,
analytics and then goes to records, you'll notice that it doesn't set this to none.
Or built-in
pushes
method
it on
called
top of it.
toFixed.
So what we would like to do
and what
is,
toFixed does
when we press analytics,
it breaks down the
sets this to
decimal
none,
places
and
by
then
any
it
number
sets that to.
So what we want to do is we want to take this
we can
average
fix that
salary,
by,
and we don't want it to go out to the 10th or however long it
setting
wants
it to none,
infinity decimal places. We want to bring it down.
So
to
first, let's take this container
2 decimal places.
closing tag here.
So what we can do is
let's move it down here
and type dot, and
that
you'll
takes
see
care
that
of
there's
that alignment,
various things.
And then let's come down here and we can do an exponential
before
method.
we run
We
our
can do
analytics
local
talk.
string, precision string, value of,
our analytics,
or we can do toFixed
section.
And what
toFixed
we want
does,
to take it, breaks
our
it down
record
to
section
and set it
decimal place
to none.
And this is a
So it
method
automatically
take parentheses at
collapses that regardless.
And then we want to do the same exact
parentheses
thing.
inside the parentheses is going to be a number of how many decimal
We
places
want to do the same exact thing.
So in our case, we want it to be 2 decimal places.
Before
now, when we set it
at
at
2
2
decimal
places,
places,
set our analytics
any
section
decimal place at the third,
so what that'll do is that'll
automatically
close
going
it
to round.
and then run our block of code. So now let's see if that
which is
fixed
important because sometimes you're dealing with rounding. Certain HRIS systems it really just
over here,
isolates that rounding
up
care
to where
you
always
one
are spacing
error
issue.
Employees benefit when we're
which it
thinking
did.
about
Notice
salaries.
how now it's part
And
of this
others are
container,
like,
so
nope,
it's
we're
going to be
not.
aligned.
We're just rounding
Now,
down.
if we go to
We're gonna
record, it
remain
should
consistent.
set this
We're
to
just
none
cutting off all the
and
decimals.
then populate it.
So that
And
is
you'll
one
notice
thing
that
to
it shut
keep in
down.
mind.
And then if we
And
go to
will
analytics, it'll
encounter
close
that
this
when
to
we
none,
begin really
and
diving
then
into
it'll
our
open up
compensation analysis. Is how are we going to handle round
the piece.
But for now, we're just
here
going to
and
set
hit
this to toFixed
our analytics.
at 2. So we'll run this. And as you can see, this used to be 5.3. It was 5.38.
Very interesting.
And it rounded
lag
up. So
here.
our average salary,
But as you see,
that
it goes
we
away
pay for our
hit
current
analytics.
employees is
That goes away and it populates. Now we'll be able to come
so
in,
now that we
hit
have
an
an
employee
average,
number,
we can start
and
building
then do
in
something with that employee number without having all
our
that other
analytics. And again, I
record
don't want to
pieces
build out an
in the
entire
way
HRIS
hidden
system
from
or
you.
dashboard. I just
So I'm
want
going to end this
give
video
y'all
here.
enough tools
And
to say, okay,
the
I
next
have
video, what we'll do is we will
enough
start
resources
building
and
out
samples to really
our
start
calculations
playing with it.
So what I would like to
Because
do
in my
is
first
just
video,
create
I
a very
mentioned
simple
the best way to
calculator
use or learn
initially,
Google Apps Script
and
is
then
by taking samples and then changing
possibly
to see
grab
what
some
is actually
salaries
occurring.
and
at
maybe
the end
find
of our
the
next
average
video,
or
we
whatnot.
should have enough.
So I hope this
to truly
this
go
video
off and
has
start
been
playing
helpful
with it and changing
we'll
it.
look forward
to
to
fit
your
seeing
own
you in the next
individual
video,
industry
and
and
until then, please
organizational need. So the next video, we will build out these cells here.
Hello and welcome back
the
to our
cell
series
will
on
be
learning Google Apps Script
essentially
for
we'll
HR.
start off with the
Brought to you
average
by
and we will
Prairie-HR-Solutions, where we
perform this
believe knowledge should be shared,
calculation
and
automatically
HR
once we
professionals and
populate our employee
rethinking
number.
how we're delivering
So
our HR
I hope this
services and solutions
episode
by utilizing the tools
was
that we probably
that you found valuable.
disposal.
And I hope
My name
to
is
see you
Jake
in our
Finger,
next video. Until then,
Principal
please take
Consultant
care.
here at Prairie-HR Solutions.